This is PlayStation 2, a home gaming console released by Sony in the year 2000. To me it still seems quite modern because I was brought up on games like this, and the PS2 gave you games like this. Back in 1977, 8-bit computers started to be sold to the home market and became hugely popular in the 80s. In the late 1980s, 16-bit computers arrived. Then home game consoles really took off with Nintendo, Sega and Sony leading the way. In 2000, Sony released the PlayStation 2, which was incredibly popular and went on to sell in record numbers up until 2013. Now it's 2025, we've survived the global financial crisis and the COVID pandemic, and AI is here to either save or destroy us all. My point here is that the PS2 was released closer to the release of 8-bit home computers than to today. If we peel away the top of a PS2, we see a disk drive and a huge heatsink. Under that is the Emotion engine, developed by Sony and Toshiba. It's based on a 300 MHz MIPS RISC core with 2 vector processing units to do 3D floating point maths and a memory controller, all physically close to transfer data quickly. Outside there's 32 MB of RAM, a 150 MHz graphics processor and an I/O controller based on a 34 MHz MIPS CPU that also gives us PS1 compatibility. Those stats might sound pathetic today, but compared to an 8-bit 2 MHz CPU with 64K of RAM from 20 years earlier, it's pretty good. Even compared to a PS1 that's about 10 times the power. Now I've never really been a console person. I had an Atari 2600 that did stuff like this, but I did actually go out to a real shop in the early 2000s to buy a PS2. This actual PS2 here. So let's plug it in and see if it still works. No, it doesn't. You can see it's trying to work with all its might, but it's just showing gibberish. The sound seems to be okay and I can control stuff, but the graphics are like a bad trip. Luckily I have a friend, and he kindly gave me his old PS2, and it does work. Yay! All PlayStation 1 and 2 games come on CDs or DVDs like this, and PS2 could play PS1 games, which is a good thing. It could also be used as a DVD player for your telly, again good. I always really liked the DualShock 2 analog controller design, and apart from being a bit dusty and wired, it hasn't really aged much as far as I can see, but I was brought up on controllers like this. You can insert these little memory modules to store game state, and obviously these can easily be moved between machines, so I can use my old settings just like I'm using my original PS2 from back in the day. I've still got my old GT4 garage filled with cars of my dreams, and a Mazda. You could also get a 40GB internal hard disk which went here. But you don't need to take your PS2 apart, just lift this flap and insert from behind. One thing I have noticed is how fuzzy the graphics look on my TV. I think that's partly down to the standard composite cable. So I've got this component to HDMI adapter. You just select the component option you want to use with this little switch. Then in your system configuration select the same thing. Using composite video the output is a bit vague, but using the new component adapter it's much crisper.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There is one common problem that my new PS2 has. Most games come on DVD-ROM like this, They have a silver back and they do load, but they're slower than on my original console. Some games come on compact disc like this, with a blue back, and they won't load at all. There are a few suggestions on the internet. The laser is the most likely problem, a simple clean of the lens may help. The spindle might need cleaning too, because if it can't grip to spin the disc properly, then DVDs which are more data dense may load eventually, but less data dense CDs time out. Another option is to look at the state of your hole in the disc. The original PS2 design is a bit of a block, but a slim design was introduced by Sony and it is considerably smaller than the full-fat PS2. The CD mechanism is now a top loader rather than a tray. Much of the space was saved by not having the accessory space and moving the power supply to an external unit, so no big fan is required for cooling. The Slimline PS2 is actually a very similar size to an 8-bit ZX Spectrum, or in this case the Retro Games imitation. This is an 8-bit BBC Micro. It was released in 1981 and had many great games including the Formula 3 racing simulator Revs, released in 1985. 20 years later, Sony released Formula 1 05. Both games came on disc but of different kind. Revs looks simple, but has a surprisingly good feel about it even though you're controlling it from a keyboard. It is a simulator, not just a game, and the car dives under braking and the track turns and undulates and shows turn and brake markers. Formula 105 is so far ahead in graphics, 20 years ahead. The detail is very good, including the buildings and countryside in the background, the steering wheel and the driver's helmet design. Even the grass is mown. But don't forget, Revs had to fit in a 32K BBC Micro, and you may have noticed there's a lot of blue sky on Revs. Fun fact, the programmer Jeff Crammond took part of the screen memory to store data and then used a hardware trick to hide it. Back to the Spectrum, and a genre of game I spent far too much time on, football management. This is Football Manager 2 from the late 1980s. You selected a team and it played the games out. Exciting stuff, I think you'll agree, but incredibly addictive once you got into it. You could control your squad, handle club finances and buy and sell players. 15 years later, we have LMA Manager 2003, and the user interface and level of information is so much better. You can actually watch the full game, not just highlights, and it's genuinely entertaining to watch. It's goal time! I've got a few favourite games, but the ones I really like have a nod to the past. The notorious Grand Theft Auto has this Commodore 64 intro and continues with a really nice 80s theme. Gauntlet Dark Legacy was an update of the legendary arcade game Gauntlet. More on that later.
Go on, warrior man. You can do it.
But if you want proper retro gaming, the PS2 offers that too. There are loads of compilations of older games from some of the great icons of arcades and consoles.
Sega.
We can go right back to the 70s and play original Space Invaders and several variations. This is Phoenix. I remember playing this on a table machine in a hotel in Torquay as a kid. Williams made some amazing arcade games. This is Defender. The speed and sound were awesome, but it was so difficult. And this is Robotron, a frantic shoot the robots and save the humans game, which works particularly well with a PlayStation twin stick controller because that's how it was in the arcade. Remember Gauntlet Dark Legacy? Well, that came from this.
Welcome. Say keys to open doors. Oh, warrior, your life force is running out. Ooh.
Capcom had some nice shooters that weren't all in space, like 1943. And Bionic Commando, a forest-based army shooter with a clever Inspector Gadget movement mechanism and funky Latin music. Meanwhile, back in space we have Exijus, a side-scrolling shooter with a mesmerising parallax cardboard background. Vindicators is a nicely presented top-down with a bit of isometric futuristic tank battle game. But if you want something more cutesy, then Bubble Bobble may fit the bill. Or how about New Zealand Story? Then, moving into the 90s, and from the Sega Mega Drive, we have the legendary Sonic the Hedgehog. Vector Man from 1995 is getting quite close to PS2 time, and you can see it in the graphics. To me this looks like a transition point from flat side scrollers to something with more 3D modelling. Now for something less serious and just pure fun. Root Beer Tapper is just a classic old school game that you can pick up and play for hours. I'll always love the simplicity and ingenuity of 8-bit games and the hardware they ran on, but for me the PS2 represented a watershed between old school home computer games and the new era of truly effective 3D gameplay. Because so many were made, you can pick one up in good condition for not much money, and there are loads of games out there on auction sites and in charity shops. Before 2000 I was starting a career and forgot about gaming for a while, but the PS2 got me interested again. After the PS2, games just seem too serious and real and complicated, and that's what I want to escape when it's playtime. So what I'm trying to say is that the PlayStation 2 holds a special place for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. I really did have a lot of fun making it.